Okay, so today we are going to have a look at the C208, the Grand Caravan in Microsoft Flight Simulator. This is the stock C208 that comes with Flight Simulator, and we're going to take it from cold and dark on the ground and go through kind of the minimum settings in the aircraft to get it up and running and to take it for a fly and explain what the controls are along the way. So let's go and jump inside. Before we go and delve around the switches and the instruments, we'll go and have a look around inside. So you can see it's quite nicely modelled in the simulator. Unfortunately, none of it is interactive in the stock version, but then this is the version everybody's got, so I think it's the one that's most worth covering, just to see what's there, what works, what doesn't. Okay, so let's have a look around inside the cockpit. So you've got the lighting switches over here, or the light switches. You've got the strobe, nav and beacon. Some of the light switches don't work, like the no smoking and seatbelt signs don't work, and the cabin lighting doesn't work. Oh, maybe it does. Yeah, actually, yes, I tell a lie. You've also got anti-icing controls. You've got the engine control panel over here and the avionics master switches. In the centre, you've got the console with all the levers, and we'll explain what each of those is in turn. So if I just scoot across with the camera, you've got the flap lever here, which selects your flap setting. You've got the fuel condition lever, or engine condition as it calls it. It's fuel mixture for most people. And again, you can control some of the levers with axes if you have them. So I'm in here on my controller, I am moving the propeller pitch lever with my joysticks, or sorry, with my controllers. And then you've got the power lever. You've also got an inoperative lever here for emergency power in the 208. So to get the engine started, what you're looking at doing is putting the engine condition lever forwards, which is essentially the same as doing a rich fuel mixture. Then you're looking above your head, and there are two levers above, and these are the valves for the fuel tanks. So you're opening those to allow both fuel tanks to drain. Now, in a 208, if we scoot across, the fuel tanks are in the wings. Obviously that's above the engine, so it's gravity fed, so you don't have to pump, you don't have to have fuel pumps pumping the fuel. And then to start the engine, you come over here to this control panel. We turn the batteries to on, which gives us master power to the aircraft. You've then got the generator, which defaults to on anyway. You've got fuel boost, you will need to switch on to start the engine. Ignition to on, and then you've got the main starter switch for the engine, so we can go start. If you haven't got the valves overhead open and you haven't got the fuel condition lever forwards, then the engine's not going to start. So essentially this is allowing any fuel to get to the engine, and this is restricting the fuel that can go to the engine. Okay, so you can hear the engine spooling up over there. We've got the avionics switches, we need to switch those on. It's also got standby avionics, we don't need to worry about that at all. Unless you're simulating failures and you want to go using standby avionics, but there you go. So you've got the standard G1000 in the 208. The only thing to note about it is the altitude knob is missing from the bottom left of the left hand, the primary flight display. It only exists on the master control panel for the autopilot, so it's here. So if you're used to using it in the Cessna, you'll be looking for the altitude knob thinking where have they put it, and yeah, it's over there on the master control panel. So the master control panel is kind of interesting if you're only used to the Cessna. So most of the buttons you would expect to be here on the left hand side of the G1000 have been transferred up to here. So you've got heading, approach mode, nav mode with the course button, flight director, you've got autopilot, yaw damper, transfer autopilot, that's so you can go between pilot and autopilot. Pilot and co-pilot, what am I talking about? You've got vertical speed button and the vertical speed rate, you've got flight level change button and the speed mode as well. But we're not going to get into too much about the systems today. We're just going to get the aircraft running and go for a fly and see how it flies. So before we start taxiing, now we have the engine running, we really should have the lights on, and off we go. Obviously we've got an outside air temperature of 20 degrees, so we don't have to worry about anti-ice measures at all. Okay, so we are at Santa Barbara Airport, so I'm just going to release the parking brake, which is this small lever underneath the yoke. We can see we've got the pitch of the propeller already on maximum, so as we slowly increase the power, the aircraft starts to roll. So we can run this guy over, and this one, and we can press space to sit up like with any of the other aircraft in the simulator, and we can go and taxi out towards the runway. On the way we will drop flaps to take off position, which is the first setting of the flaps basically. We would only use the second setting for landing. The turning radius is much sharper if you're going slowly, so you can see that happening there. I touched the brakes and then I was able to turn much more sharply. It steers very well on the ground, the stock version. It's very docile, doesn't twitch around like some of the other aircraft. Oh, we're not supposed to go that way. Look, there's a cross. So we will turn. And we will enter the runway here. So it makes lots of nice reassuring creaking noises when you're taxiing around. So this is runway 25 at Santa Barbara. Okay. So full power. We're using quite a lot of right rudder to begin with to counteract the torque of the engine. Gradually less as we pick up speed. And if we just hold it straight with the flaps on the first setting, we should find we can pull back gently and we're in the air about 80 knots without really trying. So then we can trim slightly to allow for the torque of the engine. You can see we're drifting slowly with the wind as well. So we can get an idea of the wind today by pressing primary flight display, wind, option 3, and you can see we've got a crosswind. Across the runway, we go back. So we are now airborne. So typically flying the 208, you can turn the pitch back to about 75% and the throttle back to 75%, and it will cruise along quite happily at kind of 140 knots once we're leveled out. We can lift the flaps, make it obviously, which makes it much more aerodynamic. And you will see the speed slowly creep up to about 140, 150 knots. So obviously we're still climbing at the moment, 800 feet a minute. So we're just leveling out slowly, coming up towards 1,000 feet. So if we start a turn, before we do that, let's go and have a look on little map. So the runway direction was 250 degrees. We've obviously started to turn gradually to the left anyway, out over the ocean. So if we go for 70 degrees, we'll be going the reciprocal of the runway. So begin a turn. Up to 1,500 feet now. The Caravan is very, very manoeuvrable, and on full flaps you can descend at quite a steep angle, and it's very stable. Whether it's realistic or not is another matter, but for a beginner turboprop aircraft in Flight Simulator, it's actually very, very good. Okay, so you can see the airfield and where we took off from a few moments ago. Just flying past. You can see that as the aircraft picks up speed, it's wanting to go nose up. So you do, if you are flying manually in the 208, you do have to trim a fair amount. So the balance does change with speed. So you can see we're kind of evening out to about 150 knots. At 75% throttle and pitch, so you can see that reflected down here. They're quite a long way from the end of their travel. The advantage of running at a lesser throttle and pitch setting is you get much more fuel economy, because you're not running the aircraft in an inefficient state, if that makes sense. Okay, so you can see I'm not touching the controls now, and it's just gently climbing of its own accord. So we'll just trim elevator down a little bit. It's very, very stable. So have a look from outside. It's a very pretty aeroplane. There's this huge luggage compartment underneath. So we're just going to fly out a little way past Santa Barbara and then turn back in and do an approach with the flaps down to show you the steep approach characteristics. And obviously being able to climb as rapidly as it can and descend as rapidly as it can, and its short field performance makes it ideal for mountain flying. So let's look round over our shoulder if we press space to sit down a bit. Okay, so let's begin our turn back. So we're going to cut the throttle now to 50%. And even at 50% you can see the speed is not coming off. So we're going to cut back to idle and see how it behaves. So the speed has dropped off dramatically, very quickly. We are now in the region on the flaps, also on the indicated airspeed where we could drop the flaps. So just coming around towards the airfield. We'll see the runway soon. There's the runway. So we are going to drop the flaps. So I've gone to full flaps and I've let go, and you can see the nose is raising. It creates an enormous amount of lift. If we look outside, the flaps are huge and they're almost the full length of the wing. So at 50% throttle, with a little bit of trim on full flaps, it will fly along quite happily at about 76 knots, 75 knots. Yeah, and that's with 50% throttle. So it just shows you how much drag the flaps cost, but how much lift they also give you. So we're quite high above the runway. It looks like a very high angle to come in from. But this will illustrate the short field performance. So we're going to cut the engine, straighten up on the runway, and watch the relationship of the speed to the angle we're coming in at. So we can basically drop at this angle towards the runway on idle, and we're doing 60 knots. So we can come in incredibly steeply and slowly. So the amount of control you have over it is actually quite stunning. So we're just going to take our time and glide back in. So we're actually losing speed, even though we're coming down so steeply. So I'm going to open the engine slightly, which allows us to have a slightly shallower glide path. So let's press the F key to center our viewer, press space. It's quite nice that with the default pressing F and space you can still see the indicated airspeed, which makes you incredibly lazy about configuring your view in the aircraft. So you can see over the nose and still see the important instruments. Okay, so back to idle, and we're falling towards the runway at quite a steep angle and getting away with it. So you can still side slip and do all the usual tricks about, you know, coming down an even steeper angle. But the basic configuration of this aircraft lets you get away with some very steep approaches into difficult runways,
500.
or to avoid obstacles. So short field grass runway performance is fantastic. Okay, so we just level out over the runway and it will flare, and we're down. Something we haven't touched on at all is it also has reversers. So if we push the power backwards against its run, we have now reversed the pitch on the propellers. I haven't used the wheel brakes at all there. And if we continue doing so, it does its party piece. And now it can go backwards. So in addition to be able to come in very steeply, once you're on the ground, you can also engage reverse pitch on the propellers and shorten your short field performance even further. Okay, so let's just taxi back off the runway. Oh, and there's a van in the way. What a surprise. I noticed there is a user story for the airport traffic going down taxiways and runways that's on the being looked at list with the SOBO at the moment. So in one of the future updates, maybe the traffic might start behaving a little bit more sensibly. Okay, so let's just go and park up. Come in next to the other one. Hopefully this car is not going to try and drive under us. So wheel brakes back on. To starve the engine of fuel, to make sure there's no fuel left in it, we can pull the engine condition lever back. You can see there's two digital settings, but if you have an axis you can control it more accurately. We can pull the propeller back to feather. We can leave the throttle at idle. You can see that starving into fuel has done its work. Then obviously we can come down and turn off the... we should have turned off the starter in mid-air, that's my bad. We can switch the ignition to norm. We can turn the fuel boost back to norm. Avionics to off. And over our head we can go and turn off the valves for the fuel tanks. And we are cold and dark on the ground once more. So I haven't followed procedures absolutely accurately there. I haven't followed the checklists. I've just shown you functionally the things that you need to worry about to fly the basic version in the simulator. So you're worrying about the engine condition lever, the valves, to start the engine unique ignition and then starter. And then you're off to the races. So to control the speed of the aircraft in the air, you're looking at the propeller condition and the power. Okay, so there you go. And if we have a look outside, something is still switched on. Ignition. Oh, the starter's on. I must have left the starter on by accident while I was showing you things and clicking on them. So the starter just illustrates there. It's an electrical system, which is a bit mad because we had the battery is back on. Interesting. Obviously that won't do anything unless the battery's on. So there is some fidelity in it. So there you go. So there's the basics of the C208, and I actually love flying it because it's so stable and so smooth. Okay, it's not the most realistic of aircraft, so you can get away with murder with it, with flying, and with some of the avionics systems. But actually, it's great fun to fly, and it's very, very forgiving. So there you go. That was the C208 in Microsoft Flight Simulator, the Grand Caravan. I'll stop recording there.